It began slowly, without drama, the way disasters always do, with heat settling over New South Wales like a thick blanket, the air shimmering over dusty roads and gum trees humming with cicadas. People waking early and checking the sky the way Australians have learned to do every summer, looking not for clouds, but for smoke, because smoke is the first whisper that something is wrong. And even before the flames show themselves, the body knows this is not just heat, this is danger. This is the season when the land turns dry and brittle, when the sun feels like a hammer and the breeze itself disappears, leaving the world hot and still and waiting. The authorities had lifted the state of emergency, and that sounded like relief, like exhaling, like maybe the worst had passed. But everyone who lives here long enough understands that paperwork doesn't speak for the fire, because the fire has its own voice, its own hunger, its own intelligence, and a lifted bans does not mean the battle is over, only that the battle has changed shape. Flames were still burning across coastal regions north of Sydney, jumping ridges, slipping through dry grass, sending sparks like shooting stars across night skies, and firefighters kept moving. Exhausted but determined, trucks roaring down dirt tracks, sirens echoing through valleys, while residents stood on their verandas looking toward the hills, knowing that the bushfire line is never as far away as it looks in the distance. At least a dozen homes were already gone, and each time a home collapses, it feels like a small universe dying, because inside those walls were birthday candles and old photos, cupboards full of memories, children's drawings, surfboards leaning against garages, family dogs sleeping on mats. And when the flames swallow a house, they swallow a part of someone's identity. Not just wood and tile, but years of living, loving, laughing. Dozens of fires were burning across several areas, some controlled, some not, some creeping slowly like a predator stalking through shadows, others exploding with a roar when the wind changes direction, turning the sky blood orange and filling the lungs with ash. And firefighters moved like soldiers, volunteers and professionals side by side, carrying hoses, digging fire breaks, their faces streaked with sweat and soot, their voices hoarse from smoke and from shouting directions over the roar of wind. Summer here is not a gentle season. It is relentless. It is unforgiving. It is heat wave after heat wave, days that never cool, nights that feel like ovens, and every degree that rises is a spark waiting to find fuel, because dry leaves become tinder, branches fall like matchsticks, and the land turns thirsty, ready to burn, ready to take a single ember from a wind gust and turn it into a wall of flame higher than a house. Authorities kept warning people, stay alert, be ready to evacuate, watch the fire ratings. This heat is dangerous, because when temperatures rise and humidity drops, the bushfires do not walk. They run, they sprint, they fly, they leap from treetops and send embers kilometers ahead. And sometimes a town can go from safe to threatened in minutes. But in the middle of destruction, there is always humanity. Always stories of people who refuse to give up, who refuse to panic, who take responsibility not only for themselves, but for their neighbors. There was a man who stayed behind with a hose, spraying his roof, even as flames came closer. And afterward he stood beside the blackened remains of his shed and said quietly, "I saved the house, we're alive, that's enough." And his voice carried both exhaustion and pride. There was a woman who drove through thick smoke with her 2 children and her dog in the back seat, whispering prayers as the sky turned red above her. And later in the evacuation center, she held a cup of tea and said, "We left with nothing, but at least we left together." And she kept repeating that sentence like a mantra, like a shield against grief. These communities are strong. Strong not because they are fearless, but because they are afraid and they act anyway. Because preparation is a habit here. Hoses coiled, gutters cleared, bags packed with documents, medicines, pet food, ready to throw in the car when the alert comes. Children learn early what fire means. They learn the smell of smoke the way other children learn snow. And they know when the wind suddenly picks up that they might need to move fast. The psychology of bushfires is complicated. People talk about weather and fuel loads, but beneath that is something deeper. Memory. Memory of past fires, memory of sirens in the night, memory of loss, of rebuilding, of generosity. And the heat wave is not just physical, it is emotional. It presses on the heart, and when the news shows red maps of danger zones, people feel it in their stomachs. But alongside fear is resilience. Volunteers leave their jobs and families to fight flames. Farmers who lose fences still help their neighbors. Kids draw pictures of firefighters and tape them to the walls of evacuation centers, turning panic into gratitude. And here is the strange, beautiful truth. Disaster reveals the best in people. In the smoke and chaos, helpers appear, strangers giving water bottles, people offering spare beds, cafes delivering meals to firefighters, someone setting up a generator so elderly residents can charge phones and call loved ones. It is community in its purest form, stripped of ego and politics, just humans helping humans. Because the fire doesn't care who you are, and in that moment, neither does anyone else. And this is where the story becomes personal, because fire is a metaphor for life. Things can change fast, sometimes in minutes, sometimes without warning. What you thought was safe can burn. Dreams can collapse, plans can be destroyed by forces outside your control. But what matters, what always matters, is how you respond. You can stand frozen, waiting for someone to save you, or you can act. You can choose preparation, you can choose courage, you can choose connection. The people of New South Wales show the world something powerful. Resilience is not born in crisis, it is built before crisis. It is built every time you take responsibility, every time you show up even when you're tired, every time you help someone else even when you're also struggling. And when the evacuation order comes, you do not wait. You gather your family, your pets, you drive through the smoke if you must, and you trust that others will be fighting the fire behind you. The flames take homes, they take trees, they turn forests into skeletons, but they cannot take the human spirit that says, "We will rebuild." After the fires pass, the land looks dead. Black trunks, ash covering the ground, silence where animals once moved. But wait a few weeks, and you will see green shoots pushing through the charcoal, tiny leaves unfolding, life returning. Nature teaches that healing is slow but unstoppable. And so it is with people. They sweep the ashes, they salvage what they can, they hug neighbors, they tell stories, they cry and they laugh in the same breath. That is resilience. Not pretending everything is fine, but knowing that even when everything burns, something inside you remains unburnable. The message of these wildfires is not despair, it is clarity. You cannot control the heat wave, but you can control your readiness. You cannot stop the flames alone, but you can choose to help. You cannot prevent every loss, but you can decide who you become in the face of loss. Life's fires come in many forms: heartbreak, failure, illness, uncertainty, and in those moments, you must remember the lesson from New South Wales. Don't wait for perfect conditions. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for someone else to take charge. Prepare, act, show up, help others, and when the smoke clears, rebuild. Because strength is not avoiding the fire. Strength is becoming someone who can walk through fire and still find hope on the other side.